Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. The acknowledgement last week by the US that huge tariffs against China are unsustainable was a significant de-escalation in the trade war started by the Trump administration. But just 100 days in the White House has seen the US president shake up global trade, and that, in turn, has had an impact on the election here and in Canada as well. Joining me now is Professor Tim Harcourt from the Institute of Public Policy and Governance at UTS and host, of course, of the Airport Economist and Footynomics. Tim is also a former chief economist at the Australian Trade Commission. He joins me in the studio this morning. Tim, welcome back to Fear and Greed.
Good to be back here.
So, Tim, I reckon you've spent most of your life arguing against tariffs. What's a man like you do in a year like 2025?
Isn't it incredible? You know, particularly when I was at the ACTU and most people were still protectionist. And I'd say, well, you know, tariffs are bad for workers. You know, exporters pay better wages, better health and safety, provide more jobs. You're better off being for an open economy for a country like Australia. And none of them believed me. They called me a free trader and a this and a that. Now, all of a sudden, because Donald Trump has brought in tariffs, they're against them. So, ironically, I'm now in favour, but at an unfortunate cost for the world economy.
So, is there any sense behind Trump's tariff argument?
I think the problem for people like you and I, Sean, is we try and see it in terms of economics, in terms of economic policy, but it's not. It's about power and it's about how he negotiates. So, as a property developer, he'd grab something, whack it on the table, and then get you to negotiate it off. And so what I think he wanted to do was to basically whack on all these tariffs for all sorts of reasons and then get everyone to come to him to get them off, you know. And, we saw those funny memes of the penguins going to the White House to negotiate the tariffs off. And so I think it's part of, I'm going to make myself the centre of the world trading system instead of the World Trade Organization in Geneva. So it's all about negotiating and a tactic, not really bad economics.
Does it work? Because in a sense, I dare say where we end up is we will end up, Australia will have a 10% tariff probably. China will have 40, 50, 60% tariffs. Does it work to us in a sense that he starts this incredible negotiating position and then we all come to something that's a bit fairer? Or are we actually getting the wood from the trees here and saying we just shouldn't have tariffs?
Well, you know, a first best world you wouldn't. A second best world you'd get them off unilaterally or multilaterally. And unfortunately, a third best world is when countries do it bilaterally like we're seeing here. I've got to say, though, for everyone being very upset about Trump and the United States, China started this.
Yeah.
China put the tariffs on Australia. 220% on wine, where, you know, Trump it's 10%, over the fact we had the audacity to call for an inquiry into COVID so that we wouldn't perhaps have another pandemic and we knew how to deal with it. And they put tariffs on us for geopolitical reasons. And in some ways, Trump saw this as you can use tariffs as a weapon over immigration or fentanyl or whatever you like, free speech, because he saw Xi Jinping do it to Australia over an inquiry into COVID. So in some ways, China started this and Trump has escalated it.
And we're always seeing embargoes against Russia, against countries in the Middle East. So it's kind of all in that same sphere. What about the politics of it, particularly for Australia?
Well, I think the reason that Anthony Albanese is in such a strong position in the election is for three reasons: Trump, and Trump.
Location.
You know, late last year, the opposition was doing reasonably well, and Albo was, he was being prompted by and persuaded by his colleagues to put off the election, and then the Cyclone Alfred came in, but he delayed it and is in a much stronger position since Donald Trump returned to the White House. And, we've seen a similar case with Mark Carney in Canada. I mean, the Liberal Party in Canada under Justin Trudeau had been in for a decade. They were in trouble. Mark Carney, former central banker like you and I, hasn't even got a seat.
World changer.
Hasn't even got a seat. And he becomes the Prime Minister and everything changes. So maybe we should have stayed at the Reserve Bank, Sean. We might have been where he is.
You might have been. I'm sure I wasn't. Future Made in Australia, that policy, does it make sense?
Well, in some ways it does, because you don't want to go around jacking tariffs up again. But I think what we learnt through COVID is that you can't have everything offshore for geopolitical security reasons. You don't want to have everything onshore either. So you do need to diversify a bit. And there are things in manufacturing, and I'm not talking about textile clothing and footwear and so on, but there are certain things in manufacturing Australia does do reasonably well. And you can give reasonable support, which is instead of putting up tariffs and putting in foreign investment restrictions. And I think every country in the world has something similar. They might not call it exactly the same thing as that catchy Future Made in Australia tagline, but I'm sure they have something reasonably similar.
But that's about picking winners though, isn't it?
It's about providing the right conditions so that winners pick themselves. But to some extent, yeah, I think it's giving assistance to some in a way.
You could be Mark Carney. I said, is that about picking winners? And you said it's providing assistance so those pick themselves.
Oh, I've learned a bit from him, I think, the last few weeks.
Stay with me, Tim. We'll be back in a minute. I'm speaking to Professor Tim Harcourt from the University of Technology, Sydney, and host of the Airport Economist. So with all this going on internationally, how important is it for Australia to take the opportunity to do a free trade agreement with Europe, if at all possible, to look to Asia to improve our relations with them? It's not like we're big trading partners with the US anyway, I mean, apart from a few products. But is it an opportunity for Australia to reach out to other countries?
It's a good point. I mean, with America, it's really an investment partner, and many of our big companies are based there. With Europe, it's interesting. Europeans were the famous protectionists. I mean, the cost of the common agricultural policy, you could send all the cows from France around the world twice on business class, and we knew it was inefficient. The Europeans now need friends. They're now doing deals with Mark Carney. They're now coming back to the table with Don Farrell. So I think Europe, will be more positive now than it used to be. What I'm interested in, and the Albanese government's done this to some extent, is to look at ASEAN, to look at India, to look at our Northeast Asian friends, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, those places that are hungry for energy. They've got a demand for food and agriculture, and a lot of the things that Australia does very well.
You are the airport economist, and I know you've been to some of those countries recently. Are they interested in Australia? What do they see Australia can offer them?
I was just in India, in Bangalore and Chennai, and of course they're interested in Australian innovation, and India gives them scales. So I had a small chemicals company called Callington that provides different chemical services for aircraft. They're based in Chennai, and they can service all of India and Qatar and the Middle East, and be based in that port city. Bangalore, India has an incredible space, program. Yeah, right. And Space Machines is a startup based at UTS, actually, at Botany. And it basically is like the NRMA for satellites. So if your satellite breaks down, Space Machines will come and fix it.
Oh, wow.
So they're based in Bangalore at the sort of the hub of Indian space. So I think there's opportunities there. And I was also in Taiwan last year, and what I noticed was that there's a lot of Taiwanese investment in southern India, in Bangalore, in semiconductors and in AI, because Taiwan is also thinking about this brave new world and where they want to diversify their production. And we heard, of course, that Apple's moved 60% of its production from China to India. So obviously India and Taiwan are making a bit of a play there, and that's quite good news for Australia.
Is India as bureaucratic as it used to be?
Not anymore. Right. I went to the Tata campus in Chennai, the Tata consultancy services, and can you imagine? They now have digital passports in India. You don't use cash. 30 years ago when I went there on my tuk-tuk, I was
ripped off in India on my tuk-tuk 30 years ago.
Probably were. But I was pulling, packets of rupees out of my. You don't use cash in India now. And so, a villager will pay for his groceries using his phone, so it's quite different. And Tata's extraordinary because they're famous all over the world, and they're working with Australian companies here. And you go through the usual past the sacred cows and the tuk-tuks and all the craziness, and colour of India, and then you hit this space age campus on the outskirts of Chennai. So quite an extraordinary scene. So very different than it used to be India.
What about Indonesia? How big an opportunity is that? So many people.
So many people. It's interesting with Indonesia because it's always very close to us. And when I was at Austrade, I found we had more exporters going to Dubai than, say, Indonesia.
Yeah.
And Indonesia's really, like your Brazils, like the United States, big domestic market, was never seen as a low-cost sort of production place like the rest of, parts of Southeast Asia. It was always an internal domestic market, and that's what the Indonesian story is. But I think for Australia, our ties with defence and education is pretty good. And, we have, at UTS, we have, startup programs with ASEAN that are centred on Indonesia. So, yeah, a big country with an amazing middle class, you're going to get those opportunities.
When's the next book? You've had, you said, but off air, you said, 7 sort of eco-trade books, 1 footy book. Guess which one sold best?
Footynomics, yeah. Footynomics has outpaced all the other trade books, believe it or not. And if it wasn't for Donald Trump, I don't think I'd be able to talk trade much in the media. So, yeah, I did economics as sport for a bit of fun and also being a sports nut like most Australians. But I found it fascinating. Not only, our summer sports like cricket that are so big in the IPL and there's so much investment in Australia, but the fact that we have 4 footy codes, 4 football codes in Australia.
Sustain them.
With the demand for talent and fans and broadcasting is extraordinary. Most countries have just soccer or maybe soccer and rugby union, but we have 4. So it makes it quite a...
Does it work?
I think it does. And the consumer wins because
Consumer
you get
always
so
wins.
much choice.
That's true. Tim, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thank you.
That was Professor Tim Harcourt from the Institute of Public Policy and Governance at UTS and host of the Airport Economist and Footynomics. This is the Fear and Greed Business Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, business news for people who make their own decisions. I'm Aylmer. Enjoy your day.